Greetings to Africans on the continent and to Africans around the world. This is King Etchu. The UK African Investment Summit started yesterday, January the 20th, which is also Martin Luther King's Day, which that has been celebrated in the United States. But yesterday, which is the 20th, the UK African Summit, where 15 African states or 15 African leaders are present in the United Kingdom to discuss about further deals and investments to Africa. I came across one article which was relating some of the information on what was discussed in this summit. And one of the big ideas that was discussed by Johnson, the Prime Minister of UK, is that UK immigration will put people before passports. Johnson tells African leaders. So if you look at the history of Britain when it comes to African immigrants, when you make a mistake or do something that goes against the laws in United Kingdom, what mostly happens is you get deported back to your country. So many Africans have been deported from United Kingdom for mistakes made. So now they're trying to make the immigration more favorable for Africans so that they could bring them in. And this is one way to bring the smart Africans into the United Kingdom so that it helps develop their country. Brain drain, as they call it. The more the smart Africans are leaving out of Africa into other Western world and even to Asia, they have so many summits. I'll give the list of the amount of summits that they've been having with different countries. But Africans, this is just another strategy to that United Kingdom is going to utilize to have access to the resources in Africa, and the resources also means the people of Africa, because people are a resource. People are a resource, and when they tap on the intelligent Africans who are being now brought into United Kingdom and to other nations, those brilliant ones, those brilliant Africans help United Kingdom grow. Meanwhile, Africa doesn't, which is why you can see most of our African leaders, they're not doing things that are for Africa or for the people of Africa. They're all whatever they're doing, all the summits they're having. They have summit of the France African Summit. They have the Japan African Summit. They have the Russian African Summit. They have the China African Summit. They have the Indian African Summit. When are we going to have the African and Global African Summit? When are we going to have that? Many of our leaders will go and sit on this useless summit, which are being used. This is another form of the Berlin Conference. They have divided Africa for their benefit, and they are continuing to use the Berlin Conference for their own benefit. The 15 nations that are in United Kingdom for this summit are mostly British, English-speaking countries, apart from the guy who is heading the African Union, this francophone guy. I could call him Forky or something like that, Forky or whatever his name is. He's the plus one. So there are 14 African English-speaking nations plus that one, which make it 15 leaders, 15 African leaders. They're all British. These are countries that were colonized by the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is separating from the European Union to have more control over the states that they colonized through investment deals. There's no free lunch, Africans. African leaders, there's nothing as free lunch. If you guys haven't understood the game of politics, then you shouldn't be playing with politics. Because politics is about power, it's about exploitation, it's about schemes, strategies that will be used to outsmart the other nations. And the fact is this, after Berlin Conference, everything has been set in place for nations like France, nations like United Kingdom, nations, European nations to take advantage over the continent of Africa. But it's gotten more interesting because other nations like India, China, Japan, Russia are getting involved in the African with the African summit based on their countries. So it's making it more difficult for United Kingdom and France to be involved. But then again, if you look at this, if you look at what happened in the eco currency, France knew that if a better deal was set among the countries of ECOWAS, those an agreement would have been done with the leadership of ECOWAS. That agreement would have excluded France, and France would lose control over the French African nation in West Africa, and they couldn't allow that. That's why Macron took the opportunity to use the Ivory Coast president and make a deal with the 8 other French African nations in West Africa, and then submitted the bylaws and clause to the 5 English-speaking African nations in West Africa plus Guinea, which the 6 countries disagree and did not sign on, to those bylaws that were set, because those bylaws would have entrapped them, to be somewhat in control, or at least to have some leverage over those countries. It's a game of tactics and strategy that France, Britain, and the rest of the European nations are playing on Africa. The only way for Africa to stand tall is to unite under the United States of Africa. Have one government, one currency. Speak boldly with one voice. And then that will create the power that we need to make deals with nations that we want to make, and to not make deals with nations that we don't want to make. But with what is going on right now, France is making deals with the French African nations in West Africa and the French African nation in Central Africa, which creates a division within Africa, the Francophone division and the Anglophone division. And then you have Britain, which is having their own summit now to make sure they have that market within the English-speaking African nations. So Africa is already divided with all these languages that were forced down upon us by European nations. Without unity, Africa will not grow. And the only way unity can come is when the African youths stand up for Pan-African revolution and fight the government in Africa. Because the government in Africa is not for the youths of Africa. It's not for the people of Africa. Those who benefit are those who are in power. because they are being backed up by governments like the United Kingdom, by Russia, by China, by India, by other nations with these so-called deals they're bringing up, with these deals that do not actually benefit the people of Africa, but benefit the few leaders who are there. And there's another statement that the president of the prime minister of United Kingdom made. He said, "Look around the world today, and we'll swiftly see that UK is not only the obvious partner of choice, we're also the very much partner of today and of tomorrow and for more years to come." Britain came to Africa, colonized Africa, just like France did and many other nations. How was that a good partnership for the people of Africa? It was never a good partnership. It was a slave and master partnership. And that is the continuation of what is happening today. Of what the division that is among Africa with the European influences it goes back to the slave or the colonization of Africa. The slave is the slave and the slave master. This is the partnership that is going on with Africa and countries in the European continent, or countries like United Kingdom, France, and so forth. I will finish by making this bold statement. A statement that was made by the greatest black leader who ever walked on this earth. I see him as my guidance. The great Marcus Garvey, who also inspired people like Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Kwame Nkrumah, all those leaders that we respect and adore. Learn from this great leader. And this is a statement that he made. Any leadership that teaches you to depend upon another race is a leadership that would enslave you. Any leadership that teaches you to depend on another race is a leadership that is going to enslave you. Look at the African leaders who ran to the United Kingdom African Investment Summit. Why do you think they do that? They are depending. These leaders are depending on the United Kingdom for investments. That's what all the African leaders have been doing with all this summit that they have been having. Depending on France, when France had the France and African summit. Depending on Japan, when Japan had the Japan and African summit. Depend on Russia when Russia had the Russia and African summit. Depend on China when China had the China and African summit. Depend on India when India had the Indian African summit. Our leaders are only depending on other races, and the fact that they're depending on other races. Those are leadership that is enslaving the people of Africa. And those leadership must be removed. Those leadership must be taken out from leadership because they don't know what leadership is. Every African leader that rush to any summit when they are called upon depends on those other races. Africa, to survive, we will need to create our own power. And to create our own power, the great Marcus Garvey had already envisioned that and gave us and said that even though he won't be able to create it, he knows that there are people who are coming after him who will help create this vision, the United States of Africa. We must create the United States of Africa so that we can have the power to determine our own fate, our own future, to be the masters of our fate. Because if we don't do it, African youths, nothing will change. All the investment, they were giving eight. Eight never helped Africa. Now they're starting with investment. Investment is doing a little bit, but it's not doing much. Because why? With the investment, there are bylaws and bylaws in those investment that is being given out. With the Chinese, what do? They make sure they bring their own people to come and work because they're the one giving the money. Their people are the one in control of the work that need to be done, or the infrastructure that needs to be taking place. Meanwhile, we have our own people who have gone to school to the level of masters and PhDs on their fields, yet they have to come be subservient to the Chinese workers, because the Chinese is the one feeding, or at least the Chinese is the one giving the funds for infrastructure to be taking place in Africa. It's an all slave and slave master mentality. It hasn't changed. Mental slavery is still stuck in our heads, in our minds, in our soul, in our spirit. We feel the need to serve other races, which is why you see many of the African leaders will run from one continent to another, for one country to another, when those countries call upon them. But the youths must wake up. United States of Africa is the only future for the people of Africa. For the people of Africa to control their own destiny. When will Africa have the Africa and the Global Africa Summit, or the African and Diasporan Africans Summit? When? But then again, this is King Etchu. I'm out. Till next time.